welcome to this tutorial. So today we're going to be drawing a dog's nose, and we're just going to be using pastel pencils. So this is a tutorial that's aimed at beginners or somebody who has come fairly new to pastels, because I wanted to give you a taster of what you can achieve and the level of detail that you can achieve when you're working in pastel. So this will be done on pastel mats, and it will be part one of two tutorials. So we're going to do a nose from the front and then one from the side, because understanding the anatomy and how the light hits various planes of the nose is really important. And hopefully through doing something small, it will build your confidence when you start to do your bigger portraits of animals as you progress in your pastel journey. So I hope you enjoy it, and just take your time, have fun, and I'll talk you through all the steps that you need. So you can see that I've got both of the dog's noses outlines scoped in. So I'm going to start with the front nose first. So I'm going to get my putty eraser and I'm just going to lightly get rid of those lines. I just needed to have a little bit of a map on the paper, just so that I know where the outlines are. Now when I'm starting, I'm going to first of all put in the darkest areas. So I'm just going to use a black, and I'm going to use it very lightly, so I'm not going to press on or anything with this at this stage. But what I'm trying to do is to just get an idea of where the darkest areas are to start with, and by not putting huge amounts of pigment down to start with, it gives me the scope to pull back from that if I need to a little bit later on, and to layer over it. So this is just really I'm just really starting to feel my way around the nose. Now these are the airways of the nose, and you can see where you've got the nostrils here. And these obviously, when a dog's panting or anything like that, then these nostrils flare outwards. So you've got this separation here. And then you've got the middle bit of the nose down here. So just starting to very, very gently put the areas where I just know that I've got to be careful about keeping those areas quite dark. But as I say, I'm not putting huge amounts of black down, because black is not going to be my real go-to colour for most of the darkest areas. So once I've done that, I'm going to just get my Payne's grey colour, and then I'm just going to go and just put some of the shadow area on the top of this nostril here. So again, I'm really thinking where all the shadow areas are. So I'm not thinking about drawing outlines or anything like that at the moment. It's all about shadows and shapes, and nothing sort of too defined at this stage. This is all about just getting an idea and a feel for what the nose actually feels like. And I think it is so important that you avoid putting down lots of lines, because nothing has lines in real life. If you look at a person, look at a dog, it doesn't have an outline. Everything has you know, the shapes and the shadows. So I think it's really important to avoid putting lines down where you can, and keeping that softness around those areas. So you can see, really, this is why I always call it the really ugly stage of any painting, because we've just got those sort of ugly areas scoped out. And also these colours don't bear any resemblance to a brown nose either. So again, sometimes the colours that you put down are not the colours that you would initially think you would need when you come to start a drawing. So looking at how those colours make sense of everything is really important. Now I've got my dark areas in, I'm just going to go in with my white pencil, and I'm just, again, very lightly going to put where the highlights are, just so that I can scope out these sort of lighter areas where the light is hitting this nose. So I don't want to put those in too hard at this stage. Then I'm going to go in with my Kappa Morton Violet Light, and then I'm going to just fill in these areas where it is at its lightest. So really what I'm doing is I'm trying to get rid of all the background colour of the paper. It's a bit like sculpting, I would say, but you're sculpting on paper. And so I'm trying, when I'm doing this, I'm trying to think about the anatomy of the nose. I'm trying to think where the planes are, where everything curls around and all the rest of it. So I'm going to go back in at this stage again with my cotton bud, and I'm going to start to blend all of this pigment in, so that at this stage it does look like a bit of a road map, but in my head I know now where the darkest areas are and where I need to start to build up those layers. Now at this stage, if I was drawing a dog's nose portrait, I would be thinking about how this actually fits into the dog's face. So I would not just be drawing it in isolation, I guess, so because otherwise it just ends up like a button stuck onto something, and I think everything has a relationship with everything else around it. So even though I'm not going to be drawing very much of the fur here, I just want to get a feel of what the fur surrounding the nose would be, because as I say, nothing has these sharp edges, and so if you just draw the nose in isolation of not putting in any of the fur around it, it will look a bit buttonish and it won't look as realistic as we want to achieve with that. So I think it is important when you're drawing anything like an eye or a nose that you're really super aware of the surrounding fur and the shadows around it, because it will make it much more believable. And I think that you know, that's when you're drawing animals, that is so important, to make them look as believable as possible. So these are where the darker areas are really going to start to be refined, and this is round the edge of the nose here. So again, I'm just going round this with the Kappa Morton Violet, just to refine these areas here. Now again, I'm not pressing on hugely hard, so I think that just be aware of your pressure. If you press too hard with pastel pencils anyway, they'll break, so they do self-moderate to a certain extent. They'll only let you press to a certain extent before they start to protest, but you don't really need to press very hard with them, because you know, the pigment comes off and it's quite soft, so you can work your way through quite a lot of pencils if you start to press on really hard with them. So again, you can just see I'm starting to refine these darker areas again. I'm not putting huge amounts of pigment in, and I'm referring constantly to the photograph, so that I'm kind of drawing what I see, not what I think I see. So sometimes there is always the you kind of, your brain goes into autopilot sometimes, especially if you've drawn things lots of times, and you know, I think it is so important to just keep referring to your reference photo so that you can really have a really good understanding of what you're actually drawing. And again, I'm blend with my cotton bud. Cotton buds are fabulous for this, and as I say, it retains an awful lot of the pastel mats, so that you can carry on working in very subtle layers. So you know, you can keep going for quite some time doing it like that. So I'm going to refine the nostrils now, so I'm going to go in with brown to start with, because although it has that sort of dark tonal quality, and we will go over it with black, I don't want it to be a flat black, plain sort of flat black. because I think it doesn't really do justice to the shadows that you've got in the nostril. So the shadows are reflecting a lot of the light in the nostril. So I'm going to go over it with black now that I've put the brown down, but it won't be as flat as it would be if I'd just gone in with a hard black initially. And again, although this area here has got more of a sort of a straighter edge, it's still not going to be a really sharp edge. And I think again, beware of your sharp edges. You don't want lots of sharp edges, especially it just makes it look unrealistic. Now, because noses are sort of wet as well, we want to make sure that we sort of make it look like it's got some sort of softness around it, so it looks like it, you know, a bit squishy, and you know, we'll put some of those highlights on there. So I'm going to go back in with my Kappa Morton Violet light, and again you can see I'm doing these little circular movements, very gently circular movements, just building up the layers of pigment, so nothing too over the top. Now it's interesting because this is a quite a pinky colour and the nose is a brown, so by the time we've finished it will look like a brown nose, but the colours that we will have used will be predominantly sort of red based. So again, that's because we're sort of choosing colours that are closest to the photograph rather than just what we think it should look like. And again, I'm just going to push that pigment in, soften some of those edges round. This is where patience really starts to be a virtue in as much as when you're doing pastel work, because if you take your time and you're prepared to build the layers up gradually, that's where you'll get the best magic in the results. If you try and put the pigments down too heavily in the first initial stages, you will fill the tooth of the paper up too quickly, and then you won't be able to go back over and refine and do some of the nicer tweaking at the end of it. So really what you're doing is you're buying yourself time by not doing too much too early on. It is tempting, it's tempting to go into, you know, the detail. I tend to hold back from it as long as I possibly can, so that I can really start to refine and to really enjoy refining this sort of area of it. And you can see how the tones are building up now, and I'm going back over the Payne's Grey again and just darkening that down a little bit. So you can see how it comes around. This has got that soft edge around here. Now we're going to make the magic happen with that in a moment. So when I'm pulling the pigment, I'm pulling it in the direction that it would be if it was on the nose. So I'm trying to replicate the feel of it in my head. I'm trying to think, how does that feel? I think that does help and inform how you draw, actually, because I think naturally when you can see something in your head, I think it is much more intuitive as you're drawing it. So you can see this subtle sort of shadow around here. I'm going to go over with a little bit of white. I'm just going to subtly just pull a little bit of pigment out into here. Just want to get that. And I'm going to push it back again with the cotton bud. You see how you've got that sort of nice subtle as the light's hitting this, and then I'm starting to just very gently put a little bit of this white pigment over the top of this grey to just pull it back a little bit, and some pushing and pulling, pushing and pulling, and just getting where we want it to. how we want it to look. So I'm just working out in my head, where does this plane, where is it, what is the colour, how does that land? And so you're constantly having this internal conversation in your head when you're drawing. Well, I do anyway. So yeah, and that's what gives you that realism. So I'm going to just go around the top of this with the Payne's grey to just make this a bit more defined along the top here. Again, yes, we don't do hard edges, but this bit along the top here is there's quite a dark differentiation between the top of the nose and the fur. And then this is quite a subtle sort of transition of colour. So I'm just going to darken up these areas here. And what I want to do is to get this bit over here. So this is as it curls back, and obviously you've got your light hitting this area here. So I'm going to get the Kaplan Morton Violet light, and I'm just going to start to fill this area of colour in a little bit more. So it's going a bit pinker than I want it to be, so I'm going to lighten all of this up with a bit of white after I've been over it with my trusty old cotton bud, and push that pigment in there and then bring it down like that. So then again, a bit more pushing and pulling in sort of pigment and colour. This area here around the nostrils, so I'm going to go in with the brown just to feather that area around there, because I don't want that to be a hard edge around either one of those, because that's where it's sort of curling round and you've got your lighter plane here, so you don't want it to look too dark or too, and then obviously you've got your light bits on the middle of the nose. So I'm going just very lightly going over this with brown now to sort of push back that pink, because it's obviously quite pink and I don't want it to look that pink, because the nose is actually brown. And with pastel, very often you have to do this with quite a lot of the pastels, because you can't get the exact colour matches, so you have to sort of almost mix them on the paper, as it were, which is what I'm doing here really, is I'm mixing these pigments quite sort of gently on the paper to get the right colours that I want. And I'm going darker at this stage than I actually are going to end up with, so it's looking quite a lot darker than it actually will end up looking in the end, because I'm going to go back over with some lighter pigment in the end to get it to the tones that I actually want. Again, I'm referring constantly to the photograph, so that I'm trying to make sure that I'm getting those areas where it needs to be dark. I'm getting, you know, a good representation of those darker areas. A lot of what you do when you're drawing is intuitive rather than sort of prescriptive, and you can watch tutorials and you can copy exactly what somebody else does, but I think over time you'll have your own way of doing things. I mean, I know when I've watched tutorials with different people doing them, everyone's got a slightly different way of working. Some people work in bigger blocks of colour, some people work much more in sections, you know, and there is no right or wrong way of working. It's really whatever works for you, and if you get the results that you're looking for. It doesn't really matter how you get there, as long as you're happy with the overall results. So I'm now going to go in with the grey white, and I'm just going to start picking out some of these lighter areas now, very, very lightly, just picking out some of these lighter pigmented areas. Very, very light touch. Don't want it to be too white, I don't want it to be too bright. And I'm doing these little circular motions because it's actually picking out the pigmented, you know, it's kind of on the surface of a dog's nose isn't smooth, it's kind of got like these little circular sort of areas where they you know, are able to pick up different scents and things. So I'm kind of replicating that with the circular motions of the pencil as I'm going around. So I'm going to go back in now with this pink a little bit more, and you can see that we've got this kind of line along here as it's quite dark, so we need to address that because I don't want this line. So I'm going to start just putting in some of these highlights here along the edge here. This is where the light is really sort of hitting the nose as it comes over the top. So I'm just dabbing little dots here, nothing too heavy, don't want to be too heavy-handed with that. And then a little bit down here. So coming down, I'm just going to go back in with the Kappa Morton Violet Light and just make this bit fleshier around here. And then go back in with the Payne's Grey. See what happens when you, you know, you get your putty eraser and get rid of that. Always a way of getting rid of things. So, pastel matte is pretty good for actually getting marks. As long as you haven't pressed in too hard, you can actually resolve problems quite well. And if I was drawing this as a full portrait, it wouldn't matter because I'd have the fur that I would be able to go back over with that area there. So I'm just going to lighten up this little area around here as the nostril goes in there. And I'm just going to blend a little bit with this cotton bud. And then I'm going to start just this little area down here. As the nostril comes, this is curled, and again this is a plane that is hitting and getting the light hitting there. I'm just going to go back over, just dab that down, and then go in again with the Payne's Grey and the Kappa Morton Violet to just darken up some of these areas on this plane at the bottom. And this is where you sort of your fleshier part of the nose is, so that's where your deeper pigmentation is. And every nose is different on just about every animal that you know, even dogs' noses, you know, they all have different coloured noses. Noses are never just one colour either, so I think it's always makes them more realistic the more colours that you lay down and the blend to get those lovely subtle tones of colour. I think that's where if you're aiming for realism, then aim for as many layers as you possibly can to get those colours accurate. So we'll go around to this side. So I'm constantly referring to the reference photo to make sure that the structure of the nose is accurate and that I am following the contours of the nose. Make sure that we get it, all the bits where they should be. And so you can always go back and refine, you can always go back and tweak and alter, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to have that feel of a nose. And I think if you're drawing pet portraits particularly, it is really important to really take notice of a dog's nose, because a dog's nose is a bit like how important it is to a human portrait as well. You can see I'm just going up here now and just kind of joining this area up a little bit with these shadows, because I don't want this to look like it's got a line on it. I want it to naturally come down, but I also want to make sure that I've captured that shadow really well. I'm just going to go over it again with, I'm just going to use a newer cotton bud to just blend a lot of this here and soften a lot of this area here. So you can see how subtle that's starting to look now, and the subtle transitions of colour. It's looking much more subtle than it was previously. Dogs' noses and cats, the owners will know. There'll be something about the nose in the character. I know my little dog Sybil, she's got a little like a little cross on the front of her nose. It's a little sort of pigmentation, and it's so cute. It's so cute, but it's so her. And you know, it's the one thing I really notice about her, and I love it. So any portrait I ever had of her, that would be an absolute must to have that in the portrait. So owners are always really aware of their animals in that sense. So always make sure that if there's any distinguishing features of a pet when you're drawing it, make sure that you include those, because the owners will always notice those before anything else. So I use these little tiny cotton buds for sort of refining more specific areas, and they're very good for getting those blending sharp outlines and softening them right down. So they are really good for, you know, doing those fine bits of detail, which I find, you know, they are really useful for, and pulling out pigment. So you're getting rid of those kind of hard edges, which we don't want. They are really great for things like that. So, and you can see how it's starting to soften and feel more blended in those areas. And we don't want those sort of overly dark areas. So you can see I'm actually drawing with this, and for me this is one of the most useful things that I use in my toolbox of pastel drawing equipment. So I'm just going to go back in with a little bit of lighter highlights here along the edge of this nose, just where the light's hitting this area, and then just a bit more down here. And then I'm just going to, this is got very sort of brown here, so I'm just going to warm that up a little bit. And then very finally, I'm just going to finish off with the highlights. So I'm going to use a blue just to put in some, and this is because when the photograph of the dog would have been taken, this is reflecting the blue sky. So again, be very aware of things that do reflect on your photos as you're doing your photos. You know, if you're taking the dog out of context and you're not putting it on a sort of a green background, because it was taken, you know, on grass or something like that, and then you suddenly using lots of green highlights, it'll look a bit odd. So reflected light is something that you need to be aware of when you start to edit your photos to draw from. Okay, so I'm just now really sort of refining, making sure that I've got everything where I want it to be, and just really tweaking it, lots of tweaking. But you can, you know, you can spend a lot of time tweaking photos, drawings rather, and sometimes you can overwork them, so it's knowing when to stop without, you know, overworking them. But I think there we've got a nice little nose on a dog, and when you come to do your outline of fur around that, I think you find that that would be a really good interpretation of a dog's nose. So we're going to move on to the second drawing, which is the side of a dog's nose. So you'll see the different planes and how that hits. Sorry about my green hands, I've got ink on them. So don't normally work with ink, but I did today. So we will go and we will do that, and we will do the next tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you've learned loads. So we'll move on to the next one.